Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Real Training for Free. Microsoft MVP Nick Cavalanci here, sitting in for Randy Franklin Smith. Today's topic is sort of one of those forgotten parts of our network. I think there's at least every one of us is at one time or another can remember either creating a service account or we know about a service account that like someone created like 10 years ago and no one's touched it since. One of those deals. And so in the spirit of trying to better secure your environment, keeping in mind that those accounts probably have some pretty decent and pretty significant privileges when compared to just a regular user, there's this need to figure out how in the world do we secure those things. And for most organizations, I think MFA is a must. We did a recent webcast here, did a Real Training for Free session around MFA a week or two ago. And I asked the audience, just sort of an informal survey, if they had MFA in place or if they didn't. And it was basically like everyone had MFA to some degree implemented. So I'm assuming that that's probably the case for most of you today. And so this kind of becomes an issue where there's this blind spot that exists because service accounts really can't get MFA working, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. And so this is sort of a very timely discussion for many organizations, because you're trying to figure out how do you get those last bits, those last, let's call it the last 10%, that last 500 feet of the 5K race, whatever it is, the service account represents that last little bit you've got to figure out how to get secure. And so we'll talk today about what do we do about privileged access regarding service accounts, and in an attempt to use MFA, but usually a failed attempt in using MFA for service accounts. Today's Real Training for Free is made possible by the good folks at Silverfort. And joining me today is Yiftach Kashet. He's the Director of Product Marketing from Silverfort. Yiftach, thank you for joining me. I know we've had this conversation once or twice before. I've done some webinars together, so I'm glad to have you again.
Yeah, same goes for me. Great honor to be here, Nick.
Yeah, glad you're here. A couple bits of housekeeping. I did see someone that Matthew had actually mentioned there's no audio coming through. Hopefully that gets fixed in the Q&A. Maybe Brendan, if you can respond to his question there. If you have any audio problems, the easiest way to do this, I'm assuming most of you using computer audio, just switch over to phone call, even though you're not going to make a phone call, and switch back to computer audio. That generally fixes any kind of audio issues that go on here. Today's Real Training for Free session is being recorded, and you will be sent a link to the recording in an email in a couple of days in case you missed part of this or want to share it with a colleague, that sort of thing. Looks like Matthew got back on. We just talked about you, Matthew, while you were gone. He's one of our audience members. And then also, as always, if you have any questions, comments, anecdotes, thoughts, whatever you'd like to interject into today's presentation, I do have the Q&A box here open in front of me, and as always, we'll try to interject your questions, your comments, etc., contextually throughout the webcast today. We'll still, of course, have formal Q&A time at the very end for about 10 minutes or so, time permitting, but we try to interject those as much as possible. That way, you're sort of asking the question in real time while we're talking about it, as opposed to, remember that thing you talked about 40 minutes ago? Let me ask you a question about that, and then no one remembers. And that makes things a little more pertinent to the presentation itself. So I'm going to jump in here first and talk a little bit about why there's a risk around privileged service accounts, kind of discuss some of the privileges that exist, some that you already know, and probably some that you've forgotten about, as well as a little bit around what MITRE says around where service accounts get utilized, and just kind of paint the picture for why it's necessary to be securing these, and then talk about a little bit of half of why MFA can't be used on service accounts, and then also what you can do to secure service accounts. So, and if you've got comments or thoughts during any of my slides, please by all means interject. I may have a question or two I'll throw your way if that's okay with you as well.
Cool. I'm all good.
Awesome. So I'm going to start off just with the idea that there are sort of two factors of risk around service accounts. There's the privileges that they have, and I'm going to start there first. And there's a sort of a laundry list of privileges that I'll put up here on the screen in a moment here. Some of them are coming through policy. Some are actually operating system privileges that are granted. Some are based on group membership. And so the other half of this is going to be use. And I'm going to show each of these sort of a different set here. So privileges I'm going to cover first. The use meaning how is it that we, all of us collectively, how do we actually use service accounts? How are they used practically in production? And you see there's some risk even in that. So when we cover privileges, you have things like log on locally, log on as a service, act as part of the operating system, those kinds of permissions that are granted to some cases to log in interactively is another one, that kind of thing, to a service account. And so those alone can give a threat actor, of course, the ability to do something at least malicious on a given system. Maybe if nothing else, have persistence, act in stealth, that sort of thing. Then you've got domain and local admin membership. So in this case, we're thinking about maybe you have a domain account that's a service account that's been made a member of a group that then is added a local system, or maybe given the log as a service permissions on multiple systems, that kind of thing, or just done on a one-off basis. But no matter what, there's an opportunity there where, depending on how you've got it implemented, how you have the permissions assigned to enable said service account, the group memberships can also impact that. And then there's just sort of, depending on how you implement it, there could be application-specific privileges, maybe access to backups through, because you have a service account running your backup application. And in this case, think of maybe if someone could get access to that service account, maybe then they could go ahead and launch the backup application, delete the backups as part of a ransomware attack, probably done programmatically more than anything, but it's possible. And then there's also just, I put data-specific privileges, meaning they have access to certain data sets that might want to be exfiltrated as part of either just a data breach or a ransomware turned exfiltration type attack. So there's lots of privileges, and that's not even an exhaustive list, but there's lots of privileges that way. Then you've got the use. How do we all use them? And I'm going to paint a picture here that I think is relatively fair for at least historically how service accounts have been treated. I know that organizations today, particularly those with a security dedicated team, will probably not utilize service accounts in these ways, but some of you might go, yeah, it's kind of us, or we've done that, or there's probably an account or two that probably hasn't fallen subject to new policies and procedures. But there's that sort of idea of, well, we don't really change the password on it because it's not an easy way to do it. I'll talk about that later on. There's certainly PAM and things like that today. But historically, it's like, how do we do that across all the servers and make it easy and that sort of thing? So it's the same password. It's never been changed. That's a problem. That creates a risk. There's no monitoring or visibility into when the account is utilized, how it's being utilized, what it's doing. There's usually just an assumption. I created a backup service account. I assign it to the backup services, and it backs up our stuff, and we can recover using it, and that's it. I don't know. I have no idea if it's ever used other than that, and that creates risk. And then there's just no interaction with that account. You don't ever see that account being used, particularly if it's something like, let's say, backups. It just runs the backups, creates the backup jobs, stores the data somewhere where it's supposed to store it, wherever that happens to be. And there's no interaction on your part with that account. So it sort of becomes out of sight, out of mind. Or in some ways, I just sort of sum it up by this whole thing is sort of set it and forget it. Like, we created the account, gave it rights, set a password, applied it to whatever use case it's supposed to be used for. And then you've forgotten it. Now, Odessa mentions here that SIMs can monitor the behaviors of service accounts. Absolutely. That's something that's going to help with the monitoring and visibility. But for some of you, you may not have that in place. So you're 100% correct, Odessa. Love your comment. Thank you much. But just there are some of you, one or more of these usages may actually apply to you, which then creates risk. And I know you're going to talk about the risk in service accounts, so I won't ask you too much here because I don't want to steal any more thunder from anything you're going to cover. But, I mean, anything here that you might add that doesn't take away from your presentation of, where this is risky, or maybe a different question, are you seeing with your customers that they're, now really concerned about service accounts because they recognize that risk?
Okay, so to start with, you have already butchered a large part of what I wanted to say. So while you're talking, I say, "Wow, this guy practically says everything, all the right things."
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that.
All good. What I do want to add. First, I want to relate to the comment about the scene. So I think it definitely 100%, given that you know that the service account exists. Right? And there are places, there are environments where there are very strict procedures, and every creation of service account is documented, and you have some kind of a spreadsheet where you have all the service accounts and their the applications and processes that they support all listed. And if that's the case, by all means, you can definitely monitor this account. But I think I'm not far from the truth by saying that this is not the common practice. Basically, what we do see when we're talking to our customers is we are sort of play a game. I ask them, so how many service accounts do you have in your environment? Okay, and this is and there's always an awkward silence here, right?
Wait,
Because
let's play the game though. Let's ask the
okay,
audience. How many service accounts do you guys have? And ladies as well. Just put them in the question box. So for all of you, how many service accounts do you all have? And I want to play this game with you, talk a little bit. And let's see. Odessa says 13. Edna says 500. Duff says, who knows, 15 to 20. Joe says hundreds. Paul says 700. Christian says 1,500. George says no idea. Far too many people can create them and add rights. Paul says no idea without checking. Will says hundreds. Eric says 10. Lauren says 6. Fred says thousands. Thomas says not sure. I'm going to keep going without reading names here. 10 to 15. Thousands. Less than 100. Over 500. 135. 132. You guys are awfully specific. I like this. This is actually some 5,446.
okay, so kudos for this guy. This is extremely impressive. But overall, I mean, I think I really rest my case, right? I mean,
Yeah.
some of the audience here, and I really like applause for them. Amazing. If you can say I have 5,432, that's amazing. That means that, man. I mean, actually, give me your details. I want you to run the security in my company. But
Love it.
Overall, yeah, the common answer is I don't know. I think over this, over that, around this, around that, and I think the thing is that this is one of the occasions. It's really no one's fault. It's extreme. There is no built-in utility that enables you to just click a button and filter out all the service accounts that you have. It simply doesn't exist. And as we all know, the rule of thumb is that anything that entails manual labor and investing numerous man hours just don't happen. So, and this is the main issue that we see. Even before we start talking about analyzing the risk of a given service account, or detecting whenever a service account is incorporated in a cyber attack, like the first and foremost, visibility. This for most organization is really beyond reach.
I'd agree. There are ways to find service accounts, and I actually put a slide up here. I wanted you all to see this a little bit. This has to do with from, like, let's say, a threat actor perspective, as well as just you all doing it yourself. There are ways to do LDAP searches, and you can see here you can do it based off if it has a service principal name. If you've got a naming convention that's like SVC dash, that kind of thing, or whatever it happened to use. If they're all placed in a specific OU, just enumerating that. Looking at the account control settings, maybe it's all the accounts that have password never expires. And then what user rights they've been granted. There's ways to do that through LDAP, and you can do a PowerShell script that will do that. And then there's, of course, endpoint service enumeration, just looking at the endpoint and enumerating all the service and looking at all the details of those services. Event logs, just trying to find what logon types are non-interactive so that they're not logged onto the desktop, but they're logging on. And then there's lots and lots of white hat tools. And I put, like, an example, the search script at the bottom here. And I think this sort of goes along with your point, Yiftach, about the fact that it does require some manual work to find all these. And none of these are going to be necessarily foolproof unless, for the sake of conversation, those of you that have a really good grasp on your service accounts, let's say you have either full documentation or you have something as easy as, like, we always put SVC dash in my example anyways, in front of the account name, and that way we know it's a service account. I'm actually wondering, for those of you that knew the number, and you know the number like down to the number, not like hundreds, but you know, you have the 132 and the 5446 and that kind of answer. Is it just based on documentation? Do you have a methodology? If so, what is it? I'm just, you're curious there. You have customers that are going through, these manual stresses, the prospective customers, I should say, that are going through this manually trying to figure out what they even have in the first place?
So many of them try. Some of them succeed. Like, in all honesty, I mean, whenever some of our customers have, there are large companies, fully staffed security team, they are aware of the risk, and they have the extra resources to invest in building. I've actually talked to one of them, and he told me, yeah, we had a PAM project ongoing, and in order to enable the PAM deployment, we first had to do the mapping. And believe it or not, we sat for like 6 or 7 months and just mapped out. And now we have a CSV of all our service accounts, and we know what they do. So I'm not saying it's not impossible to do that, but it's extremely resource consuming. Okay, and for most of us that have our environments to handle and don't have resources at hand for this type of task, this is extremely hard. And I just want to add another thing. I mean, you started with a slide that you talked from the standpoint of an attacker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Suppose I'm a threat actor and I've gained some foothold on your environment, and so all these methods are great, but the most straightforward one is just searching for the naming convention, right? Search for the SVC, SRV. People tend to be extremely non-creative when assigning names to the service accounts that they create. So in a way, it's I would say it's like the balance here is for the favor of the attacker. It's like it's extremely easy to discover part of the service accounts that you have, right? It's equally hard to discover all of them. And the problem is that as from the defender side, you have to discover all of them. From the threat actor's perspective, if you just found 5 good ones, you're good.
5 good ones. Yeah, exactly. Some of the answers that came in from the audience in terms of how they know how many they have. Same OU, password doesn't expire, monthly scans of AD. There's a change management process, ServiceNow requests. They do it through account provisioning. They have a list of non-expiring users. So there's a number of different ways, and there's some other ones that are in there. I couldn't get to all of them. Odessa mentions documentation. So there's a number of ways that the folks have been doing that definitely know. But I think to your point, Yiftach, thinking in practice, the real challenge becomes for those of you who are trying to put this in place, the usefulness of a security account versus the security of a service account, versus the security of a service account, to the point of like, well, don't put SVC. Let's use, planet names or characters from Star Wars, or once the threat actor gets wind of that, then you still have all the names from Star Wars. Pretty easy to know those are the service accounts. So it's really hard to come up with something practical without becoming an issue from a security standpoint. Let's do this. I want to move on and talk a little bit about MITRE and sort of the role service accounts can play within an attack. And I've got my very large, very tiny listing here of all the different MITRE attack techniques, the tactics that are used here at a high level, and then you see some of the techniques below. And of course, none of you can read that. So I'm going to zoom into some of these and use my cool guy animation here to at least jump into some of this. And you see we start over on initial access. It just shows up under valid accounts, meaning there's a use of initial access. This is probably more so if they have already compromised an account, or if maybe this is in conjunction with like a supply chain compromise of some kind, and then get access to an account via the application itself. Maybe something along those lines through a vulnerability. That's possible, but it's already an existing account. Sliding over a little bit, you've got under persistence there, you have, in some cases, it's creating an account that's a service account, so it gets granted that, or just, again, valid accounts. You're going to see valid accounts used time and time and time again throughout the MITRE ATT&CK framework here, just because of the fact that that's one of the avenues. Is it's an account that already exists. Why would I have to make one if I'm a bad guy? I can definitely hide in stealth because it's an account you're expecting to be accessing a whole bunch of endpoints, like a backup service account, something along those lines. And again, with privilege escalation, you see valid accounts. So privilege escalation falls under that as well. And then in defense evasion, it's again down there at the bottom. So apologies for the somewhat seemingly redundant entries, but the idea is that it's that critical that it gets used time and time and time again, and serves as such a great purpose for the threat actor. And then as we get over to like credentialed access, it finally takes a little bit of a different turn, which is doing like credential dumping. There's also, in that case, it's maybe getting LSA secrets. It's any kind of, if they have system access, they can try to get LSA secrets, which could have, basically credentials for service accounts, that kind of thing, which are stored in the registry. And then there's also, they could be dumped from memory, something like a Mimikatz or a Lasagna, something along those lines. And then there's stealing or forging Kerberos tickets, and there's silver ticketing. Basically, if the threat actor has a password hash of a service account, they can end up potentially forging a Kerberos ticket that grants, a ticket granting service ticket, a silver ticket, and then they can basically gain access that way. So there's a couple of ways there. And then the last thing I've got here is just discovery, and that's the idea of doing the account discovery, doing that enumeration, the stuff that I showed you back a couple slides, whether it's an LDAP query or it's enumerating services or doing something along groups, looking at group affiliation, but any kind of account discovery is where service accounts are coming into play. They're not used here. This is where they're discovered here. Have you anything to add sort of to all of the MITRE related kind of focus here in terms of actions where service accounts are leveraged that you've seen in attacks?
Well, I think you've actually touched it in what you said. I think the striking thing is that seems like very boring, right? You see valid account all over again, right? And even where it's not valid account, it's basically like a subset of valid account, right? The credentials of the valid account, the hash of the valid account. And I think it really illustrates the sort of the gap between how we perceive the identity protection and how we perceive, for example, the malware protection. So like, for example, so here in the MITRE framework, there is at least more than like 50 techniques and sub-techniques that, relate to this type of malware or process execution or change of bit here or task there. In terms of identity protection, in terms of lateral movement, basically what the MITRE framework tells us is you have a valid account, fine. The way is paid for you as an attacker. The same way that this valid account slashes through all the tactics of the MITRE framework. So this is actually really corresponds to the way an attacker can slice through your environment. It's basically valid account, whether the service account or user account or domain account or whatever, it is practically everything that it takes. I do want to add, I think if you go to the MITRE, to the steal, forge, Kerberos tickets, and I think if you'll expand it, so we'll also see that one of the main techniques that used against service accounts is Kerberosing, which basically enables an attacker to obtain the hash of the service account and then go offline and crack it. And this is something that, like, judging by the amount of attacks that we see in which attackers got into the environment and immediately logged in with the service account's name and password even without bothering to do a dump, credential dump before that, this is a technique that is becoming more and more prevalent, and we're seeing it in many, at least we see it in many of our customer environments.
Yeah, let's talk about, you're touching on something that is sort of really important here, and it's the idea of trying to secure the service account. The whole concept of MFA came up, obviously, because of the fact that we only have an ID and password. It's really simple. Once you have those both, you've got access, and that becomes the real challenge with a service account itself. Is just that's all that it is. It's an ID and a password, and the real challenge with MFA is the idea of something well. It meets that criteria. There's something that the service account knows. It's its ID and its password, if we were sort of personify it, meaning the person putting it in knows the ID and the password. But there is no have. There's no something you have. It doesn't apply because it never comes into play. There's no something you are because it's no biometrics that go along with it. This becomes the real challenge. And then generally speaking, there's only an ability to singularly authenticate, at least on premises. I know that there's some advancement that's been done on cloud-based service accounts where they're starting to leverage maybe authenticating to another platform, something along those lines, as a secondary form of authentication, which is good. But on premises, on a Windows server, which is why we talked about this being in Active Directory in the title of the webinar, there's no way to really do this with a service account. So we move on to something like, let's say, PAM. And password rotation certainly helps with that. Would help with things like the hash. If the hash is stored in memory, it's no good because it got changed yesterday by a PAM solution and then, of course, synchronized out to all the systems that are utilizing said service account and that kind of thing. But there are some limits depending on the PAM solution. Things like scripts that have it hard-coded in may not be able to be updated. Applications that are using it, maybe through an API, may not be able to be updated. Depends on the solution. So it's not perfect there. And then, of course, there's the monitoring the service account use. So we even had a comment earlier about SIM Solutions monitoring that. But it's not always necessarily logged, depending on what you have logged, which servers are being logged, what server is that account being used on, all that sort of stuff. It kind of comes into play where it's not necessarily a perfect solution that you can't just say, put MFA in place. Well, you can't. Put PAM in place. Maybe not necessarily it's going to work flawlessly across the board, or just put monitoring in place. That's not always the answer. I mean, what do you find with prospects you've talked where they're trying to secure? What are they using? Are they using some of these? And then, and if not, what are they doing to try and secure them?
Okay, so I'll go over these options one by one. So actually, so MFA, well, to be perfectly honest, even without talking about service accounts, applying MFA end-to-end in an Active Directory environment is practically impossible because Kerberos and NTLM don't support MFA natively. So the best you can do is maybe secure your RDP connections with MFA. But there's no way in the world that you can enforce MFA protection, for example, on command line tools like PSExec or PowerShell and enter PS session, right? So within Active Directory, there is an MFA blind spot, and we'll talk, and I'll refer to this in my slide. But as you said, even let's assume a perfect world where you can apply MFA to the accounts. Yeah, that's a problem, right? In service accounts, yeah, you're right. They usually don't own cell phones, so we can't ping them to ask if they are. So basically MFA is out of the question. I know there are some solutions that that give you the option, maybe like to couple the service account with an actual human user. So like, for example, and I'm the help desk now, the help desk manager. So there's some kind of a chaining, and when the service account's attempt to access, so I get prompted to verify that it's the service account. But I've never seen this actually work in practice because service accounts have this annoying tendency to log in mysterious times and hours, and usually even when this technology is in place, it's usually suppressed or not used. And PAM solutions, which are good for their own purposes, I think you actually touched the point. The point is that if I don't have visibility to the service account, first of all, I can't vault a service account that I don't even know that exists, okay? Even if I know that it exists, I don't necessarily know where are all the scripts that when executing, that when being executed, launch this service account login. And the password of the service account is hard-coded in the script, right? So these scripts cannot be automatically synced with the password rotation within the PAM. And what we see, and I think, and this is one of the major hurdles that our customers encounter when they try to deploy a PAM solution, usually they'll say, look, we don't know exactly what this service account does, and we're too concerned about the possibility that some critical process or application will be broken if we'll vault the service account in the PAM and subject it to password rotation. So, you know something, let's forget about securing the service account in the PAM altogether. And this is about the PAM. The monitoring has, and again, you can only monitor if you know that the service accounts exist, fine. But look, as a rule, and I've worked with many SOC teams, and I've seen many practices. So when you are monitoring, okay, even if you have a dedicated tool that actually triggers an alert when it detects malicious or anomalous activity, even in these circumstances, you're getting an alert, right? And we all know the statistics of how SOC teams deal with alerts, and SOC teams and the capacity of a SOC team. I used to joke that, you know, like once 20 years ago when I was young and stupid, I used to get all these letters, you know, from income tax and Social Security and whatever. I've never opened the envelopes. I just pushed them into one of my drawers, and whenever it was full, I threw everything to the garbage. Okay, not best practice, not recommended. But this actually reflects what happens with, I think, almost around like 60% of the alerts that an average SOC analyst gets every day. So if you basically monitoring service account use is just adding another alert to the queue, and it's actually even worse because you can't count on any tool to throw the alert. You have to actively go over the logs, go over the, I mean, I don't know how many of you had the questioned pleasure of going through Active Directory logs. It's not an easy nor an enjoyable task. So these solutions provide very limited value in my perspective.
Yeah, there's a question that Tom asked about managed service accounts. Those of you that are familiar with those, we're talking about obviously about just regular service accounts. Managed service accounts have been around Windows 2008, I think, is when that came out, if I remember correctly. And in this case, that's sort of it's a half computer, half user object is the best way to put it. It inherits the object class of computer, but it acts like a user. And so it does actually have its password changed every 30 days by default, just like a computer object does, and we never see that. It just happens and so on within Active Directory. And there is an ability, at least with group managed service accounts, I know that part, to obtain the password. It's still encrypted. I don't know if I should say it's encrypted or it's obfuscated, but it's not legible. I'll put it that way. But I'm pretty certain that the data is still encrypted. But when you get the password back, it's a big hex value. And I haven't seen, I've seen a couple of articles where they are able to translate that back to clear text. So I'm going to say it this way, at least in concept, it appears to be like that it's possible to obtain that. But in this case, for the stuff that we're talking about with regular service accounts where passwords don't change and all that, the managed service accounts are sort of in a group of their own, where that's one way that Microsoft is trying to address that. But we still have organizations leveraging, you can tell by the fact that by the audience response, where we're leveraging just standard user accounts that have been granted permissions. And those are the ones we still have to be monitoring. and because of the fact that there's an opportunity there to break into those a little more easily, I think, than this. This is a bit, again, since it's a quasi sort of computer and user object, it becomes a little bit of a different beast there. Let's do this. Let me go ahead and put up the last slide that I've got here, Yiftach, and
Sure.
let you sort of take over here. I know that we had a little redundancy in our deck, and that's my fault. Do apologize for that. Wasn't trying to steal your thunder. I'm hoping there's some extra detail you can go into, because I try to stay pretty light at the top there. But if you've got some added detail, please, by all means, go through that. And Yiftach's going to talk a little bit about why they're difficult to track, monitor. We've talked a little bit about that in concept. He's going to dive into that a little bit more and talk about some of the gaps that exist in AD around MFA coverage here with service accounts, and then talk a little bit about how to try to resolve that. So Yiftach, let me go ahead and give you presenter rights, and I'll let you know when I can see your screen.
Okay, cool. Just a minute.
No worries. And I can see your screen now. And what I'm going to do is, those of you in the audience, I'm going to continue to monitor the Q&A box here. So if you have questions, please, by all means, speak to those as much as you ask the questions, that kind of thing, as much as it comes up here. And then I will put a note here. Peter actually added something that I didn't mention about the managed service accounts before you take over, Yiftach. Mentions AD managed accounts only work for processes that are integrated with Windows Server. They don't work for Java and other applications that make use of AD service accounts, but aren't Windows technology based. So there's another reason why. Sorry about that, Peter. Just didn't go down that path. So anyways, with that, Yiftach, the floor is yours, and I might interject with a question or two as they come up.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so let's dive deeper. Okay, so adding context, we're talking about the reason we're interested with service accounts, and we've touched it. It's because of lateral movement, and as Nick has said, lateral movement has basically two key blind spots that enable it to take place, and these are MFA, and there's the lack of MFA in Active Directory environment and service accounts. Okay, and I think one of the things I'll argue, or try to explain here, is I want to throw it to you as sort of food for thought. And this is one of my favorite discussion topics. When you think about malware or exploits or logins, when you think about malware a decade ago and malware today, you see an immense evolution. Right? There's a very intense cat and mouse game going on between threat actors one hand and endpoint protection vendors from the other. And basically, if you take any malware payload or exploit from 10 years ago, most chance I would risk myself and say all chances is that it won't work today. So this is on the malware front. But in the lateral movement in AD environment front, the way lateral movement is conducted today is similar to the way it was 15 years ago in the Night Dragon campaign. Basically, nothing has changed. And the reason nothing has changed is because the blind spot that I'm talking about have existed 15 years ago, and they still exist today. And I think the best way to illustrate it is through a real-life example, okay? So I want to share with you an anonymized attack sample that took place in one of our customers before it became our customer. And let's skim through what we see here, okay? So you see, we have the red circle below. I'll tell you in advance. It's an Exchange server, and it was compromised with the Log4Shell attack. And once the attacker was inside, it started searching for a way to advance. And since he probably saw forward in time and heard all the conversation we just had, reached the conclusion that the best thing to do is search for a service account. And since it was an Exchange server, the attacker assumed rightly that there will probably be some service accounts that from the type, and we'll elaborate later on, from the type that are created automatically when you install software. Okay, so when you install the Exchange software on a Windows server, there are several service accounts that are created automatically. One of them is a scanner, and its role and basically what it does is, as the name implies, connects to many machines in the environment to perform various tasks from hygiene to update. And what happened was that at day one, the attacker started wondering, okay, access this machine, that machine. On day three, you see the focus of the attack has already changed, hopped from one server to another. All of this, reminding you, taking place without anybody in the security team of the customer ever noticing that something is going on. Onward, on day three, more authentications. On day five, you see it's even becoming it's becoming more intense. Finally, okay, on day seven, you see until now all the authentications were made with the service account, right? These are the blue lines. So if you look closely, you see that there is a red authentication from the top right circle to the left purple one. And basically, and what happens there is that finally the attacker has got into a machine where he was able to dump the credentials of an actual admin, domain admin, not a service account. And with this, he logged to the DC, and then basically everything blasted, right? The threat actor planted, I think it was a ransomware payload on a network share from DC, which could, because he had the domain admin credentials. And finally, okay, this basically looks like doomsday, and that's exactly what it was. And the lesson learned is that, now that two things. First of all, seemed like this attacker wasn't a very sophisticated one, right? You know, actually, if you remember, Nick, you remember there used to be the stats of how many days attackers can stay undetected in an environment, right? And it used to be 200 and something. Do you remember the numbers?
Microsoft's number was 200 and I want to say it's 274 days or something before being detected, something along those lines.
Yeah. Okay. So once I talked with a friend of mine, really cool, ethical hacker with a very even cooler background that I can't disclose. Anyway, he told me, you know, these stats about attackers staying undetected for 200 days, 300 days. Do you know how many times the really good one can stay? Okay. Anybody wants to take a guess? Okay. So the question is like this. So the top 1% of the threat actors worldwide, how long can they stay how long do they stay undetected in an attack network? You want to take a guess?
A couple answers have come in. Lauren says 2 years. Paul says 6 months.
Okay, so
6 months, many years, 3 years. We got some really long. He's been there since day one, or she's been there since day one. So.
Okay, great. So actually, so my guess was, yeah, in these lines, okay? And then the guy looks at me and smiles and said, the top ones never stay more than 2 minutes. Wow. The better you are, the shorter time frame you stay. You don't want to be detected, okay? So what we see today, actually, when we see like this, such an attack going on for like a week and more, touching tons of machines, okay, before reaching its object, we know that this is not an APT attack, okay? This is actually, I won't say working class, but somewhere in between. And even so, the attack wasn't detected. And also, and what's also interesting is that the threat actor knew that if he wants to move without being noticed, so starting with an actual domain admin account would be a mistake, because actual users, the admin users, do have a tendency to know what they're doing. And if you see, if we look in this, if you remember what I've explained, the domain admin, the actual domain admin account wasn't used for the lateral movement. It was just used for the blast. And it means that even the layman threat actors today know that if they have a compromised service account, they can wander around in the environment for days and not be detected. And I'll share with you another piece of information that we found out along when we conducted the forensic investigation. All the blue lines that that touch all the machines before the red blast, the attacker actually did nothing over there. He didn't execute ransomware. He didn't do anything. He just logged in. Sometimes he stayed. Sometimes he logged out. Okay? But all of this went undetected. And this is a pattern that we see over and over. So it's not, so when we're talking about the protecting service account, this is actually something that has to do with each and every one of us. 10 years ago, I would have probably say, look, if you're not a Fortune 100 company, forget it. You should be more concerned about, I don't know, lateral movement or passwords to your Amazon SW buckets. But these things now, we see them every day. And I think what's interesting is, sorry, double-clicked my presentation. When we're thinking about attacker's view, okay, so what's the ideal tactic for me as an attacker? Okay, and this is in my red team days. I used to phrase it like this. Ideally, I want to go for the unseen, to the unprotected, and to the high impact, right? I want to find the objects within the environment that I'm attacking that either have low or zero visibility. And also, ideally, I would want these unseen objects to not be subject to any type of protection, and I also want them to have high impact. Now, in hacker's paradise, right, I have all three of them. In real life, I have to do compromise. So, for example, if we'll compare it to the initial access part, if we'll use the MITRE framework terminology, so you never have unseen in the initial compromise, right? So I'm a threat actor. I'm sending my spear phishing weaponized emails to multiple persons in the target organization. Okay, I'm targeting an endpoint, and the endpoint is always seen and protected. Okay, and I have to overcome this. But what I want to show you now is that when we consider the identity attack surface, there actually in most cases you'll see all three of these coming together, and especially when we're talking about service accounts. So I know and Nick and many of you in the audience know that it actually can go much more granular than that, right? I mean, I've just read in here admin users, and there are many types of these, service accounts, many types of these. But just to keep things simple, I'd say, okay, let's schematically divide the user accounts into standard domain users, admin users, and service accounts. So domain users are known, right? Their impact, the impact that will have if I'll compromise them as an attacker is fairly low. And you see that there's an asterisk here, and I'm saying, assuming that privileged access best practices are maintained, okay? Which unfortunately we know it's not the case, but let's assume it is, okay? Anyway, even though they're known and the impact is low, they're not protected. What do you mean? What do you mean by not protected? It means that it's extremely hard to implement a security measure that will be able to detect a malicious authentication with a domain user account and block it as it happened. Okay, and we'll soon dive deeper into that. Now, when I skip to admin users, so admin users are known, okay, the impact of their compromise is grave, and as you said, Nick, admin users can be protected with a PAM solution, okay? Again, it's not an easy task. I've never heard if any of you are familiar with the story of the PAM solution that was deployed seamlessly within 4 weeks, I'd be happy to hear, because I've never heard the story before, but it is theoretically possible. When we go to service accounts, here's the problem. They're not known, the impact is great, and there's no way to protect them. And this is the challenge that, again, judging from your questions and reaction, this is a challenge that today many identity stakeholders and security stakeholders are painfully aware of. And when we bear in mind that lateral movement targets the identity attack surface, right? Basically, every lateral movement can be reduced to a user account that has gotten compromised, right? And then following this compromise, the attacker authenticates to Active Directory with the compromised credentials, then logs in to any amount of resources that it can, and performs the object of the attack, which, if it's ransomware, it will be mass encryption. If it's data theft, it will be trying to find the server where the blueprints of the F-35 reside, or whatever. But it's important to understand that compromised credentials, they're what empower and they're the fuel behind these attacks. And just to get a grip on the potential impact, so usually, traditionally, when cyber attacks were just about initial access plus execution, it means that by definition, you had one infected machine. Okay, and while this is not a favorable situation, it is still only a local event. When lateral movement comes into the play, so it all changes. What happens is that the attacker can wait with the execution, with the act and the objective, and the lateral movement is what enables this attacker to reach a stage in which, when clicking the red button, will have an immensely high volume impact. In service accounts, again, I think the latest statistics that we have, we found they're used in more than 60% of the actual attacks that we've analyzed. Now, when we're talking about protection, so how can we protect service accounts? And I think we've done a fairly good job in the past 50 minutes talking about the problem. Okay, but let's understand. So, what is the solution? What do we seek? So, the standard flow of any protection, and I guess if you'll go to, I will say like this: choose any website of a security vendor, go to the homepage, to the product page, and you'll see some variation of this. Right? They'll say we monitor a certain activity, right? And then we see, and then we check to see whether this activity shows any malicious signs, and in that case, we'll terminate the activity altogether. So if we're talking about endpoint protection, right? So the legitimate activity that we're talking about are running processes, right? And the endpoint agent will continuously monitor them, and if it'll spot any behaviors such as encrypting files or the Word.exe process suddenly calling some operating system functions through Win API, so we know that it's malware. And then the activity termination is terminating the process. Okay, and the same goes basically with every other type of product. If it will be a firewall, then we'll monitor the network traffic, right? And if we'll see anomalous traffic, we'll deduce that it's data exfiltration, and then we'll block the traffic, block the traffic altogether. But what happens if we want to apply this flow to the identity protection? Okay, what are we monitoring? What are we analyzing, and what is the what is the protection that we seek? So what we're monitoring is our attempted authentications, right? And we need somewhere to plug in to the authentications and analyze to discern between malicious authentications and legitimate one. And if we'll determine that a certain authentication is malicious, we'll block it. Now, seems trivial and straightforward, but it's actually it's extremely challenging. And we've touched about this before, so I'll skim through it. What is the problem? So we said everything here is about compromised credentials. Now, we know from the SaaS world and from the web world and from everything that is now, everything that is modern, we know that MFA is the best security measure, right? But what we also know is, and we've talked about it before, so I'll do it briefly. When you're talking about command line access, and this is what the vast majority of attacks will utilize, you can't apply MFA altogether. Okay, so that's the first problem, and it means that there's no way to apply this real-time protection that we're talking about. Now, when it comes to service account, it's even and before that, and basically the security challenge of Active Directory is that malicious authentication and legitimate one look exactly the same. And when we go to service accounts, so let's think, right? We have the type A service accounts, which are the one that you created manually. And Nick actually really has covered this very thoroughly. So the ones that you create on your own, okay? And again, and you had probably 5 years ago, you had this guy Bob in your help desk that worked for 2 months. After you fired him afterwards, apparently he created 15 service accounts to automate the tasks that he was supposed to do manually and left without notifying anyone. So this is one type of service account. And the other ones are like, and the other ones are the ones that are created automatically. This is, for example, the one that that the Orion, if you remember the SolarWinds attack, these are the one. This is the documentation of the service accounts that are automatically created when you configure a SolarWinds server. Now, and as we've said, here the problem is that even if you know that they exist, there is today no really valid way to protect them. And from the attack, and oh, my apologies. Copy should have been removed from this. Now, I'll just give you one example, which is a true life example. I mean, there's the one that's shown before, but this one has reached the headlines. What happened in the Uber attack flow was that the attacker gained initial access with MFA bombing, okay, and then accessed a network share. And within the network share, some script that actually that included the service account that was used to log in to the PAM in place. And with this service account, the attacker simply got the secrets of all the kingdom, and the way was paved to access all of these different services. So what I like to do now, okay, is sort of I had some other attacks ready here, but I think the point has been cleared. What I want to share with you now is how do we at Silverford were able to overcome this challenge. Okay, so what we've done is we've looked at this on the authentication flow that we're all familiar with, right? We have users, we have admins, we have service accounts, and they're logging into on-prem and cloud resources. Now, the standard flow that we all know of, you have Active Directory, right? And the users and admins or whatever, they request access from Active Directory that checks if the username and password match, and if that's the case, Active Directory will allow access, okay? But as we've established before, this is not enough, because what if these username and password are compromised? So what we've done at Silverford is we said let's intercept this process. And whenever let's talk about service account. Whenever the service account or the user requests access from Active Directory, Active Directory will forward this access request to Silverford. And Silverfort will check if this authentication is indeed legitimate. And we'll do that by continuously monitoring and analyzing the risk and enforcing access policy based on the risk or the rules that we configure. Now, this access policy enforcement, if it is a human user, then we might trigger we can trigger MFA. Okay, and this basically what enables us to extend MFA to all resources in the Active Directory environment. If it's a service account, we'll just either block the access or notify notify the scene with an alert. That way or the other, Silverfort can reach a verdict whether the attempted authentication is malicious or benign, and then it will pass this verdict to the Active Directory, and only then, based on Silverfort's verdict, Active Directory will either grant or block access of the service account or the user. Now, all this might sound long and complicated, but it actually takes place within less than within a fraction. So what I want to do now is show you actually how does it look. Okay, so this is how does it work, but let's skip to the product itself. So we have here, this is Silverfort's dashboard. And you see we have all these authentications coming in from privileged users, from domain users, from service accounts, okay? Most of these authentications, the risk engine determines that they're legitimate and let them go through. Every now and then, there will be some that will be blocked. Every now and then, there will be those that will require MFA for them, okay? Now, if you remember, okay, so what I've said, what I've started with is by saying that MFA, from Active Directory standpoint, the legitimate authentication is identical to the malicious one. Basically, it means that if I am here on this machine in my domain, okay, and I'm typing this psexec command, and I want to connect to this remote server, this ACWSCR W3, okay? Basically, I'm clicking this. Here's my password. You don't see it because you can't see it here, okay? I'm logging in, and, okay, I'm an admin. I've logged in to this remote server, and I can troubleshoot it and do anything that I want. Now, and the problem is, let's assume that here on this second machine, machine number 2, I'm an attacker, okay? And the attacker has my name is Iftach, and he has my compromised credentials, okay? So the attacker can do the exact same thing, right? Assuming that the right password was provided, okay? Same thing exactly. Now, how can we solve this challenge in Silverfort? So I'll show you. We can go to our policy screens, okay? And let's have a look on one of our policies. This one is called lateral multi-protection, admin credentials from non-admin machine. And the logic says, even if an attacker has gained control has compromised my username and credentials, still there's a very small chance that the attacker will authenticate from my machine, from the workstation that I, as an admin, am working on. Okay, so this policy basically says, look, whenever the credentials of Iftach, whenever my credentials are used to connect over psexec or PowerShell from any machine except the RD16 which is my machine, trigger MFA. So now we'll enable this policy. Okay, and now let's go back to here to this machine. So remember, we've seen before that the attacker was able to seamlessly connect. Now let's see what happens now when the policy is enabled. So I'm typing in the command and the password. Well, what actually happened is that I got this on my cell phone asking, did you attempt to access? And I'm saying, I'm the actual admin. I'm saying, no, I haven't. And this means that the attacker will be barred out. So this is how we're able to cover the MFA blind spot and extend MFA even to connections made with PSExec or with PowerShell or with WMI. But as we before, and as Nick has said before, this part unfortunately doesn't apply to service accounts. Okay, so what do we do? So what do we do about that? So here in Silverfort, I want to show you the second screen. Oh, sorry, that was the policy. Because Silverfort plugs in to the Active Directory, and because Active Directory sends every access request to Silverfort, so we see all authentications. And if we see all authentications, we can make sense of them. So Silverfort applies various analysis engines. I don't like the term AI because it's really overabused, but we have several engines in place that analyze all the behavior of the user accounts and can actually detect if a certain account is a service account or not. I mean, there is of course the easy path of the naming convention, but another feature of service accounts is that in many cases their behavior is rather predictable, right? It will be predictable because I have, for example, I remember I've configured once a service account that what it had to do was to every 12 hours log into 3 different machines and run a hygiene check script on them. So there is, even though there are various degrees of predictability between the service accounts, between themselves, still there is a major gap between the behavior of a human user and the behavior of a service account. So we've built the ability, and let's look at this one. So this the name of the service account is bind. Happily for us, it's a low risk. You can see here the graph of the behavior. As you can see, it's rather predictive. We see that these are destinations that the service account accesses, right? We know that the service account always emerges from these resources. We can see here all the activity of this service account, and if we'll go back here to the screen and expand the service account, we basically say, look, this is an automatically generated policy, and it tells you, look, this is what the service accounts do. Okay, after 2 weeks or after a certain time frame where we've learned the behavior of the service account, we can tell you reliably that this service account always the source is always this, the destinations are always this. Now we ask you, what do you want to do? You can allow this always, or you can allow this behavior only if the risk level is high or is higher above or medium or above. And you can decide what you want to do otherwise. So suppose, for example, the way we've done in our demo. Suppose an attacker has compromised this RD16.2 machine and tries to log in with the service account from RD16-2 to some resource. So this policy, let's say, if this policy was configured here to block access, the service account wouldn't be able to do so. If the policy would be configured, you can also configure it just to alert the scene. In that case, it will only be alert, not actively blocking. But the important thing here, I think the most important thing here, that you get the ability to configure this policy with almost zero effort. Okay, when you scroll down, you get a silver tray, which basically tells you these are all the service accounts that you have, and we can tell you for each service account what is its privileges level. and what machines does this service account accesses. It can even tell you, for example, if we have seen an interactive login with the service account. So if we'll click here, say this Chuck underscore admin, apparently our team are even less creative than most when creating their service accounts. So we see here that there was an interactive login, and like needless to say, there should almost never be an interactive login with service account, right? I mean, the sole reason why this service account was even created was that it was for it to operate autonomously by itself. So this is, and I want to connect what I've shown now to the challenges that Nick has talked about and the challenges that I've elaborated on. So we said attackers are target the unseen. So all the service accounts are seen now. Okay, no one can hide, and they target the unprotected. But in a way, we can take care of this now. And well, and they target the high impact. So the high impact is not something that we can change. But I think that this ability to deliver real-time protection, this integration that we have with Active Directory that basically says Active Directory gets the authentication request. Active Directory has checked that the username and credentials match. But then Active Directory waits. In a way, we can say that we've educated Active Directory to acknowledge its limitations. And Active Directory says, look guys, I only know how to check if the username and password match. Can you please check that it is indeed the legitimate user that is using his or hers legitimate username and password? And until you'll tell me otherwise, I'm waiting. And these policies enable Silverfort to do it for service accounts in the same manner it does for any other user. So this is the way that we attempt to solve this challenge. And basically, going back here, what we're saying is we've automated the discovery of service accounts. When we provide you immediate visibility into all of them. We've also automated the monitoring because Silverfort's risk engine basically tells you, I mean, risk engine is a very, I think it's an overblown term. We basically tell you whenever the service account deviates or features any other malicious behavior, and we automate the creation of the policy. And basically, all you need to do now is just click the button and activate these policies. And comparing this to the immense amount of labor that you had to invest before, this is a really significant game changer. So okay, so we've already done the demo. What I want to show you is something that I've let's run here. Oh. So this is a really short video, short demo video that I've pre-recorded that for some reason either is not running well. Okay, so this is again this is a snatch of a new version of our service account screen that has much more information. We can see that we're even classifying these between machine to machine and hybrid. These are ones that use both by humans and machine to machine, and scanners, which these are actually the ones that you should be much concerned about. And this basically gives you the visibility that you need, and the active protection that enables you to become much more resilient to lateral movement attacks that abuse your service accounts the way we've seen it so much happens. So, so with this, I conclude my presentation. And if there are any questions I'd be
There's
delighted to
actually
take them.
quite a few of them. So there are a couple that I missed during your initial description around lateral movement. And you had gotten to the part where you were talking about gaining access to a domain credential. And Paul had just asked, was the domain admin credential accessed via Kerberoasting? So in the scenario you showed the slides, the pictures of, getting from one machine to another, and then they fanned out to a bunch of them, and then you had the, what did you call it, the apocalypse or something? And so was Kerberoasting used to get that domain credential?
Actually, no. So in this specific case, they were dumped from. I mean, the domain admin's hash was dumped from LSAS when the attacker has reached the last machine before the domain controller.
Got it. And then there was another question Mark had asked around the same time, was asking about just restricting, log on to, granting what rights a particular account can log on to a given system to only servers that it interacts with. Wouldn't that mitigate? I would think that would mitigate some of that, but what have you seen in your experience with customers?
So again, this is one of it's a great question, by the way. And the answer is in many cases, yes. So it's like, it's always, the prevention is much easier than the cure. So it's like, you can't, it's definitely, if you create service account the right way, okay, so it definitely reduces the attack surface that the service account introduces, okay? But then again, the problem that we have is that it's not always the common practice. And again, and the example of a help desk that creates a service account, create it rapidly to do something now and just forgets about it, okay? The chances that upon creation of these service accounts, the best practice configuration was employed are not high.
All right, good there. That helps. Let's see. So Janet asked, while you started doing a demonstration of your product, how many authentication requests can the product handle?
Okay, so our largest customer has 140-something thousand users in place.
Just stop before you said 1,000 and let it dangle for a minute. Go 1,000 users. They would be like, what? This thing's totally bogus. That would be bad. That's quite a large number of users. How many service accounts, you guess?
So I never asked them
Okay.
that truth, but just
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot.
It's 5,446 or whatever that person was that answered earlier or something like that. So Adam asked an interesting question that I don't have an answer to, but I thought we should at least ask this because it's a really respected question. Adam's asking, do you have any stats on what the top origins of compromised service accounts, IDs, and passwords are? He's wondering, is it like scripts on file shares? Is it credential dumping? Is there any? I don't have any stats because I haven't seen any reports that have talked about those specific techniques being used. Do you have anything you could offer? And if you don't, it's okay, but I thought I'd ask.
We have some insight, okay? I'll be honest, okay? I think that until you are deployed, across like 20,000 customers and more, so what you see does not necessarily reflect what is out there, okay? But I would say, like, as a rule of thumb, okay, usually credential dumping, that's like using Mimikatz or using proc dump. This is still very common. Now, we do see also an extensive use of service accounts in attacks where it is used immediately. And I think we've talked about this in a previous webinar. There's a whole economy of threat actors that compromise your environment just to grab credentials or hashes or whatever, go out and then sell them to other threat actors that employ them in the actual attack. And I think that these rapid attacks of grabbing and going out, I think this is where we usually encounter curb roasting. This is the most popular technique over there.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the separation of duties, as it were, not really duties, but it's more like opportunity. Someone who doesn't want to get caught and be the one who's stealing the data and have to go through that hassle and face that risk. There's a lot less risk in just, I can break in, I can steal some credentials and I'll sell them. And that's good enough for me. That's, they probably even figure out what their time is per hour just to do that. Orda is asking, is this a Windows-only solution?
This, it is a solution for Active Directory environment. So it doesn't matter for us whether the authentication to the Active Directory is to access a Windows machine or a Linux machine. Doesn't matter. It's still an ACK request, and every ACK request that goes to Active Directory will be forwarded by it to Silverfort. So that's basically the answer.
Which actually brings me to the next question by Ray, which I think you just answered, but Ray said and I think maybe he might have this backwards based on what you just said, but Ray says the authentication request is routed to Silverfort node, then back to a DC. What if the Silverfort nodes are down for any reason? Do the authentication requests continue to AD? Did he have those reversed?
Okay, so I'll explain it again. So the authentication request is directly to Active Directory. Like in terms of if the source machine and Active Directory would have had any conscious, it wouldn't have noticed that something is different. So I'm a user. I'm logged into machine A. Okay, I'm opening command line, typing psexec. I want to access machine B. Right. So what happens behind the scenes is that I send an ACK request to Active Directory. Okay. Now Active Directory forwards the ACK request to Silverfort node. Okay, and Silverfort node returns an answer to Active Directory, and then Active Directory grants or blocks access. Now, in terms of the machine A and machine B, nothing has changed, right? Machine A, access request from Active Directory, and Active Directory either allowed or denied access. Okay, so everything that Silverfort does is, in a way, you can think of it, it's in the back end of Active Directory.
And what happens if the node is down? Does it just Active Directory goes ahead and authenticates?
Well, this is why we have backups. We have several nodes, and if you have large environments, so if one node, it's basically it's best, it's standard engineering practice to ensure that even if your if part of your solution for some reason goes down, you have immediate backup. So this is what we do. And while we're at this subject, I will also say, this architecture enables us to expand this protection, whether MFA for standard users or the service account protection, without deploying any agents or proxies on the actual machines. We don't need to do that because we're talking directly with the source. We're talking with Active Directory directly. So it means that by definition, 100% of the authentications get to Silverfort. And you don't have, and unlike other solutions that require you to go workstation by workstation, server by server, install an agent or place a proxy in front of a network segment, all we have to do is place the Silverfort node behind Active Directory. And this is also a very important advantage when you need to vouch for 100% coverage.
And then there was a question that came in that I'm going to sort of paraphrase. Zai had asked about like if it was installed on the endpoint. You've already addressed that. There's no agents on the endpoint. Can you just talk a little bit about maybe just how this gets architected, just at an extremely high level? Like you have a Silverfort server or servers per location, or how does that work?
Okay, cool. So I will say, so I'll just say a few words on the underlying technology. Okay, I would say the hard technology differentiator that we have is our ability to understand, to know the content of Active Directory authentication packets without having to decrypt them. Okay, so MTLM and Kerberos packets, they travel the network in an encrypted form. Okay. Now you can decrypt them, but then you can never be a real-time solution because it will take too much time. The patent technology that we have is the ability to understand the content of the packet without decrypting it. So basically, what happens is that we said we have Active Directory and we have Silverfort node behind it. Okay. Now there's a certain sizing that we do. So every node has a capacity, a capacity to support a certain load of authentication. Okay. As far as I remember, I think that currently in our optimized mode, I think we have something like 8 or 9 nodes supporting 40,000 users environment. Okay, so the nodes sort of all of them are placed behind a certain number of domain controllers, and all of these nodes they all send their decisions, their outputs into the management console, which is another VM that sits behind them. And the one important thing to take away about Silverfort architecture is to think about your domain controllers. Okay, like in isolate them from the environment. Think only of the domain controllers and place them in a circle. Okay, and within this circle you have Silverfort nodes. So that's a simplistic description.
Perfect. That helps. So we've got 4 minutes left. Going to try and get through some of these. There's a number of questions that have come in that are all sort of around Azure AD. Can you monitor Azure AD in addition to Windows AD?
Okay, that's great. So the topic of the session was Active Directory. Okay, but actually, Silverfort, our purpose was to build a unified identity protection solution. And in the same manner that we integrate to Active Directory, we can do the same with Azure AD, with Okta, with Ping, with any type of identity provider that you have. And we plug into all of them, and this enables us to really see the true context of every authentication. And when you have a scenario of a hybrid lateral movement attack, like in the attack on Okta that took place or in Cisco, and actually, Nick, it might be a very good topic for our next webinar, where we'll explore everything that takes place in the hybrid environment. So the answer is yes, definitely. And in the content, and if we're talking about Azure AD, not only we can integrate with Azure AD in a similar manner that we do with AD, with the on-prem AD, we can also translate all the AD authentication traffic to Azure AD. So in a manner that Azure AD would think that these authentications are taking place over SAML. So all the resources that you have on-prem, all the workstations, the servers, and apps, you'll see them in your Azure AD console as applications, and you'll be able to configure access policies for them in Azure AD. Which this is actually very exciting because this is the first time that you can, from a single interface, to configure the access policies for your entire resources, regardless if these are SaaS applications, on-prem servers, or cloud workloads.
Yeah, so there's one other question. Actually, 2 questions. Well, one you've already answered, I think, and you can just answer this really quickly because I got another question I really want to ask you. But Robert said, what about Linux authentication? I think you actually answered that. It didn't matter what kind of endpoint it was. As long as it's authenticating to Active Directory, you're going to say yay or nay. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so one of the other questions that came in was, Ray says, it basically is asking our agents required on the DC to send the authentication request to Silverfort node for inspection. And then it actually kind of walks through the whole thing. Is that what's going to happen there?
What happens is that what we install on the AD what we call an adapter. And the adapter does 2 things. It takes authentication packets and forwards into Silverfort, and when Silverfort sends the verdict, it passes the verdict to Active Directory. Okay, so and there's no compute. It doesn't perform any computing on the domain controller itself. Okay, it just forwards packets and receives verdict.
And then, so Ray still, as part of that same question, was sort of pressing, if all of the nodes are down, it means that people can't authenticate. But obviously, you've got a whole bunch of redundancy in place to make sure that never happens, correct?
Yeah, definitely. So if all nodes are down, the solution will not operate. If there's an earthquake, for example, or I don't know, a nuclear bomb falls and all the nodes are down, I agree. There is a doomsday scenario for every
It's never
solution.
going to happen. Okay, I got it. Yes. All right. It looks like we're at the bottom of the hour. I think I got all of the questions answered. I tried to get as many of them answered as is possible. If for some reason your question wasn't answered, someone from Silverfort reach out to you. Make sure you get your question answered. Not a problem there. Just want to say thanks again to Silverfort for sponsoring today's Real Training for free. Yiftach, as always, great conversation, really good information. Had a couple of attaboys popping up in the Q&A box, so I think this was well liked, and would love to do another one with you sometime soon. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you, Nick. Looking forward.
Excellent. Everybody, thanks for the attention. Appreciate all the commentary and all the humoring us of our unofficial surveys and whatnot to get a sense of where you all are at. That was really great. Really appreciate every one of you participating today. Thanks a lot. This is going to go ahead and conclude today's Real Training for Free session. And have a great day, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.